CataractCoach.com, podcast series, episode number 61, with Dr. Steve Schallhorn, rethinking refractive targets and learning from big data sets. Welcome back to our Cataract Coach podcast, and today I have a very special guest, Dr. Steve Schallhorn, who I first met back in the mid-1990s when I was a medical student. I could barely spell ophthalmology. I was at USC, and he was also there at USC as a corneal refractive fellow. And so, Steve, welcome to our podcast. I've got so many questions to ask you.
Hey, thanks, Uday. Thanks for having me among your, distinguished group of people that you've interviewed for these podcasts.
Oh, my pleasure. I mean, the amazing part is, I first met you about 30 years ago. I don't think I was shaving at the time, and neither of us had any gray hair.
I totally remember that time. Yeah, Peter McDonald.
Right. So obviously, even back then, you had a very strong interest. You had a very strong interest in keratofractive surgery, and so a lot of your research there at USC was, in fact, all excimer laser based. Tell us about that.
Well, that when I went through fellowship at Doheny, I was in the Navy. So it was really in the early '90s that I had this great impression, and others did too in the Navy, that refractive surgery, as it was now being using the excimer laser, it was in clinical trials, could have a lot of potential for people that go into harm's way. And so that was sort of the genesis of starting into this keratorefractive procedure in the U.S. Navy. I was in my fellowship. I went back from my fellowship back to the Navy Medical Center, San Diego, Balboa, as the cornea person down there. And really, to tell you the truth, even backing that up, the first clinical trial that was done in the Navy, I was the principal investigator, was done while I was a third-year resident.
Wow.
And so, again, realizing the potential that keratorefractive surgery can have, because at that point, keratorefractive surgery consisted of radiokeratotomy,
Right.
and radiokeratotomy was pretty popular back then. There were people doing it. It was polarizing because there was an element of the ophthalmic community that was really against it, and there were people that say, "Hey, there's a need, and radiokeratotomy can work," but it was never embraced by the military. So when the excimer laser, the concept of the excimer laser, and the early clinical trials, the first results came out. It's in clinical trials right now, the excimer laser. There was so much, from my perspective, so much appeal to that as a potential value for, again, people that have to go into harm's way. So what really got it started, though, was a guy named Frank Butler, who was also an ophthalmologist. The guy was a Navy SEAL, a fascinating individual. He was a Navy SEAL before he went into ophthalmology. He was in the Navy also, and he was working with now the SEALs. He was several years ahead of me. He was working with the SEALs, and we connected. And he said, I think this has got great potential. My work that he was currently doing with the Navy SEALs, I'm going to do two things. One is I'm going to lay out tasking to look at this excimer laser procedure, this PRK back then. And then I'm going to get the Navy SEALs to do something which makes a project like this happen, and that he said, I'm going to fund it, or the Navy SEALs are going to fund it. So those two things, that kind of the official, hey, we'd like you to look at it, plus providing the money for that initial evaluation, is what really started the ball rolling. And back then it was still in clinical trials. So we took part, that first study when I was a resident, was taking part in the FDA clinical trials, the phase 3 clinical trials.
And that was for PRK at the time.
Yeah, that was PRK. They had not developed LASIK.
It broad beam lasers with no tracker.
That's right. There was no tracker. We were actually, the very first one was with the Summit laser.
Summit Apex Pro. I remember using it.
Yeah, this was even before the Apex Pros, the OmniMed.
Oh boy.
And the original clinical trials that the Summit was using had a small optical zone, 5 millimeter optical zone, 5.5 millimeter optical zone. The OmniMed Summit laser was the laser that was introduced during the phase 3 clinical trials that could do a 6 millimeter optical zone. And so our clinical trial that we did in conjunction with Mickey Gordon down in San Diego. They used the OmniMed 6mm optical zone. So that was, again, that was the genesis, I guess, of it. And then a couple years later, then, you know, we meet at USC.
Wow. So we should take probably a few steps back and explain to those who don't know. You're a bit of a celebrity in our field because of your background. So you finish college and you decide you want to be a Navy fighter pilot. Now, how does this all work? And so obviously the selection process for that is obviously far more competitive than ophthalmology. That must be 1,000 people applying for one position.
Well, it is competitive, and it got a lot more competitive in the mid '80s after the movie Top Gun came out. But even when I was applying, it was competitive. You had to have really good vision. And just backing up, so it was a friend and I, several friends and I, had really grown up with the space program. Sure. And that was, you know, we were little kids. It was the Mercury, then the Gemini, then the Apollo launches, right? So we grew up with that. We were basically way into it. We went when I was in high school. We actually drove down and watched an Apollo launch, Apollo 15. We went to Cape Canaveral and we watched the Apollo blast off. We were way into it. Now, move ahead, we're in college, and so I'm not sure what I'm going to do. What I want to do, maybe medicine. My dad was a dentist, and when we graduated, kind of almost on a whim, it's like, well, wow, the Navy always needs pilots. It's a young man's sport. We can talk about that more, but
sure.
And I applied. He is a good friend of mine, and I apply at the same time. But back then, you had to have perfect vision. You had to have 20/20 uncorrected in each eye, and they measured it on an eye chart with 10 letters. So if you missed one letter, you were not 20/20.
Oh.
So you had to. So a buddy of mine, he was slightly myopic, very low amount of myopia, and he missed a couple letters. He could not be a pilot.
Wow.
They offered him to be a radar intercept officer, Navy flight officer, somebody who doesn't actually fly. He declined that, and he flew for the airlines. He was a captain on a 747 by the time he retired. Anyways, so it was competitive, but the Navy always needs pilots. And back then, this is in the kind of the late 70s, it was the wind down from Vietnam, and the Air Force was letting pilots go because they were scaling back from post-Vietnam. But the Navy, as I mentioned before, they always need pilots. There was always a big need. They train basically 1,000 pilots a year in their flight training, and so I, on a whim, I go down and I join. So that's kind of how that started. It was kind of a wild start to the whole process. But
and if you want to go to medical school too, you got to do the pilot training first, because that's like a young man's game, right?
Yes. So yes, it is. They haven't. I don't believe they've ever accepted someone into flight training that is over 30 years old. So it's a young man's. It's definitely a young. I want to say man, a young person's now.
Sure.
A young person's kind of sport, as I say. Sure. So I got trained in the Navy to fly, and that flight training takes years to do. It's at least as intense as going to medical school. So think of the flight training as a package like going to medical school. No, it takes a lot to get into medical school. And in medical school, it's a lot of work. There's a lot of aspects to it, right? There's a didactic, you have clinical, everything like that. That's the package to get what we call winged. So you get winged.
Okay.
You see people that wear wings, whatever. That's like getting an MD, right? Like, excellent, you got your MD. Wow, you're a doctor now. Well, that's true. You're a pilot now. That's great. What does it mean?
First step.
What does that mean? Yeah. What does that mean right after you graduate from medical school? Well, that's the start of your journey. Right. That's not the end of your journey. That's actually the start after all this work, time, trying to get in, that kind of stuff. And so it's the same thing. Then you have to go, once you're winged, then you get selected to fly the kind of airplane that the fleet flies, essentially. And there's a lot of different kind of airplanes, helicopters, and other things that the Navy has. And so back then, the newest, hottest jet, I was on the jet pipeline, was the F-14. So I was selected to fly F-14s, which was unbelievable, right? That was enormous move. And so I was trained. I did this flight training in a little town called Beeville, Texas.
Okay.
And so I then, when I got selected, I got winged and I got selected to fly F-14s. That was in San Diego. That was at Miramar Naval Air Station. So I was there. I got transferred to Miramar, and then you go through this training to fly the F-14. And that training is a similar package to going through internship and residency.
Got it.
In other words, that's a big package.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to, it's 18 hours a day, 6 days a week. It's full immersion in this, where you not only have to learn how to fly the F-14, but the flying of it needs to be second nature, because you have a mission to do. You have a reason to fly it. So you have to understand in the F-14 how to dogfight, how to use your weapon systems. You have to be able to communicate, navigate. You have to be able to do all these things in the F-14. Oh, and by the way, you have to be able to land on the aircraft carrier.
Sounds pretty intense.
And you have to learn to land on the aircraft carrier at night too. So that's another big package. And then after all of that, then you're assigned to the fleet, a fleet squad. And then, in other words, that's finishing residency. Now you're practicing ophthalmologist in the community, right? Okay. Now that's about what that is. And so then I was assigned to F-14s, F-14 Squadron VF2, Fighter Squadron 2. It was on the USS Ranger, and I made several long Western Pacific deployments on the Ranger. The Ranger was out of San Diego. And it was when I was flying F-14s, was what I call the start of the modern Islamic Revolution.
Okay.
Which is when the Shah of Iran was overthrown and the U.S. Embassy was taken hostage.
So it's 1979.
79, 1980. And so I and many other, squadrons, aircraft carriers were off the coast of Iran during that time period. So that's kind of when I was flying F-14. So it's a long time ago. But
it sounds very intense. So it's quite a long path then. And then you have even a bigger honor, which is they invite you back to become what we would call as lay people a Top Gun instructor.
Yes. So Top Gun is technically called the Navy Fighter Weapons School, and it's like a graduate level learning air combat. The next level. It's a graduate level. So one squadron sends one air crew, front and back seater, through the Top Gun course about once every other year. So being selected to go to the Top Gun course as a student is enormous. It's like getting selected to go into the top fellowship.
Sure.
Right? The top fellowship in ophthalmology. And so I was very fortunate to get selected to go again, do this fellowship, essentially, to go through the Top Gun course as a student. And so it's very, very intense. You learn many, many different things. It's much more intense in the movie shows. It's the resources, you appreciate that getting and maintaining air superiority is not a given. That there's many aspects of it, and Top Gun is designed to be the kind of graduate level teaching for that. So I went through the Top Gun course. I went back to my squadron. That was again deployed in the Indian Ocean, and it was about a year later. I was applying to medical school, and I got a message. You've been selected to be a Top Gun instructor, which is there's only 12 instructors. There's 5,000 pilots.
Yeah.
Navy, and there's 12 instructors, and so I had it was unbelievable.
So you got to do, at that point, you have to accept that and then just
Yes.
defer med school a year or two, right?
Yes. So I was a Topgun instructor from 1982 to 1984, and there's nothing like it. It's the top end flight, air combat training. All you do is you train, you do mock aerial combat, you debrief, you try new techniques. It's very, very intense and very realistic.
So the military, the Navy, is spending millions of dollars and many years to train each pilot. And then the pilots are flying aircraft that are probably $100 million in today's dollars. And so the investment in their refractive surgery is very small in comparison, but obviously so critical.
Yeah.
So then how do you get that integrated into having the Navy have an official program for this? Because now, if you had like your friend from many years ago who was -0.5 or -1, and you could give him LASIK and now get him to brilliant 20/20 and beyond vision, you could expand your pool of potential pilots.
That's exactly right. Those were expand the pool of pilots that could come in was one advantage, and then taking pilots who have developed a refractive error and treating them so that they don't get disqualified from flying is the other big advantage. So that led to that. We talked about that earlier, that first PRK study, and that led to expanded studies. There were many. There were over 100 clinical trials that I was the PI conducted, and others while I was at Balboa. And we looked at various things, marksmanship scores. We used every contrast sensitivity test and looked at things. And I always knew, this is in the 90s, that my end game was to get refractive surgery approved for Navy pilots, because I had lived it. I knew how important vision was. In fact, while I was in medical school, there was a study being conducted by the Naval Aerospace Medical Research Lab, and they wanted to find out, because it was so expensive to train like an F-14 pilot, they wanted to find out how can they improve the criteria to become a Navy fighter pilot, right? F-14 pilot. How can they improve that, right? Because there's a dropout rate. There's people that can't cut it or whatever. How can they improve that? So they looked at a host of different parameters in currently flying F-14 pilots, right? They looked at hundreds of F-14 pilots, and they evaluated them from a psychological perspective, a lot of vision tests, dynamic visual acuity, et cetera. They looked at a host of different things, every different thing, IQ, a whole bunch of factors, and a multi-million-dollar study. And at the end of the study, they found only one thing that was related to being a better fighter pilot.
Let me guess. Vision.
Uncorrected visual acuity. Simple, uncorrected visual acuity had the highest correlation. Not dynamic contrast sensitivity, or not the kind of car you drove, not your personality. It was simple, uncorrected vision with the highest correlation. And so that I was in medical school there, but I followed that study pretty closely. And so now, several years later, it was pretty apparent. Wow, uncorrected visual acuity. That is so definitive. Was definitive in that study. It's so critically important. And I remember that first clinical trial. So we put out. I didn't know how we needed 30 subjects.
Okay.
That's an FDA clinical trial, and so I didn't know what the interest would be in the community, in the Navy community, and so I put an advertisement in one of the base papers. We're looking for active duty people to participate in this photorefractive keratectomy study to correct myopia, and we got thousands of phone calls. I think we logged 15,000 phone calls, and it got to the point where the front office, the administrative staff of the ophthalmology department was just completely overwhelmed. And we got to a point, after we'd gotten thousands of calls, we would just tell the people that were interested, write a letter.
Okay.
Write a letter. Like, write, in other words, hang on, got it. I know you're interested. Write a letter. Right. Write a letter. And it was to me. So I got almost 1,000 letters.
Wow.
I actually published, it was an Arvo paper way back in the early 90s, an Arvo paper on the letters that we had received of people that were requesting entry into the study. And it was fascinating kind of read on these. This is why I want to take part in this clinical trial. I remember there was a guy that wrote a letter, and he said, "Hey, this is an officer. He was a damage control officer on an aircraft carrier." So he said, "This is why I would like refractive surgery." So he was on, I think it was the Ranger, but this is years after I was flying, and there was a fire on board the Ranger, serious fire, killed people. It's fire on board a ship, any kind of ship, aircraft carrier was a very serious business, and the Navy spends a great amount of time, effort, money, training to make sure everybody knows how to fight these fires. And again, they have damage control officers, and people work underneath them, and that's their primary job. Is if there's a fire. So this guy, damage control officer, there's a fire, it's out of control. So he was wearing an onboard breathing apparatus, an OBA, right? So it surrounds the head. It's a breathing apparatus, et cetera. So he's fighting the fire with his fire team, and the fire's out of control. His OBA needs to be replaced. So he goes to a safe area to replace his OBA, takes it off. Now the guy's a contact lens wearer. He takes off his OBA, and all of a sudden the residual smoke and fumes kind of get caught up. Contact lens kind of sucks it up, whatever. His eyes, his contact lenses are extremely bothering him. He has to take his contact lenses out, right? So he has to remove his contact lenses, but he can't run back and grab anything, right? Because the fire's out of control. There are people literally dying in this thing. So he takes off his OBA. He has to remove his contact lenses, dons another OBA, right? Goes back in, fights a fire. But now he's uncorrected, right? He's uncorrected. So he gets a presidential citation, and he sent me the citation that read, Ensign, whatever his name was, for successfully fighting the fire as part of your fire team while blind, essentially.
He was like a -8.6 or something, right?
Yeah, while blind, fighting it while blind without your contact lenses. So he was given a presidential citation. He sent me that, and he goes, this is why I need refractive surgery. And so I go, yeah, that kind of makes sense. I got it, right? That's kind of the mentality that the military has in this regard. In other words, improve performance. Somebody has to go into harm's way. This guy had to go into harm's way.
So now there's a huge program, right?
Yes. So after the inception of it, again in 1993, grew multiple studies. We finally got an excimer laser after it was approved. We did more studies. The Air Force got on board. They got a laser in the later 90s. The Army got an excimer laser, and it just started going from there. Then we got aviation started. We started doing large aviation studies, and then all of a sudden it just cascades. Right, the need is so high, so great, just like it is in the community, refractive surgery. If you can reduce dependence on glass or contact lenses and do it in a reasonably safe and effective manner, which obviously PRK and LASIK and SMILE can definitely do that.
Right.
There's a huge advantage. And again, people that have to go into harm's way, policemen, firemen, for instance, right? There's an enormous need for them to have good uncorrected vision. So it just generated, and then it ended up being well funded. And right now, there's 25 laser centers that are treating active duty military personnel. To date, almost a million have been treated.
Wow.
The need is greater than, even today, the demand is greater than their ability to treat.
Right. I mean, especially now, the more we spend doing our devices and near vision, we tend to get more and more myopia, especially among young people. So now it's even a greater need.
You bet. Absolutely. Well, here's for instance, the Naval Academy. So we started a program treating Naval Academy, and this was years ago. And now up to 40% of all people, the cadets in the Navy Academy, undergo refractive, keratorefractive surgery.
Wow.
up to 40% of all of them. And it didn't used to be that way. The Naval Academy, just like way back, the Naval Academy, just like aviation, they required you to have 20/20 vision. Well, they had to stop doing that because to get the best candidates, right, the best, most qualified candidates, they are oftentimes people that were myopic. And today it's definitely the case. So they have to do it.
What is state of the art now then? So for the Naval Medical Center, you have a patient, you have a potential patient, mid-20s, wants to be like you, a fighter pilot, and comes in, let's say, -2 refractive error, maybe some SIL. What's the ideal there? We're doing probably femto, LASIK, wavefront optimized, wavefront guided. What are we doing here? Tell me.
So it would be at Balboa, at Navy Medical Center, San Diego, would be SMILE. So they're doing SMILE.
Okay.
I would say many other centers, the state of the art is what we do in the community, and that's it could be PRK, and then especially the Army does a lot of PRK because of their concern about the flap stability from LASIK. Now, I think a lot of that, certainly in the community, the LASIK flaps are stable. We've published papers on this.
Yeah.
I've published papers on how stable the LASIK flap is, but nonetheless, that concern remains on flap stability, and so there's a high percentage of PRK that's being done. High percent, meaning probably 40% of all procedures, maybe up to 50% in some centers of all keratorefractive procedures are PRK. And again, we're talking about basically low to moderate myopia is the primary.
So what's the range you're treating here about? What's your top end? -7, 8?
Yeah. Back then, I mean, I've treated a -12, with LASIK, and this is way back. And remember, the early approvals were up to -12, something like that.
Yeah.
And so that's gradually come down a bit. I would say the upper end right now for LASIK is probably in the -8 range. For SMILE, a little bit higher. And there's certainly ICLs being done for high myopia, very high myopia, currently in the military. The go-to procedures, though, are just as they are: keratorefractive procedures, SMILE, PRK, and LASIK. And there's a combination of optimized and wavefront guided.
What would be your target? So you get this guy's or gal, and you get a potential pilot. He or she's mid to late 20s, -2 refractive error. Are you aiming to keep them plano post-op? Or plus quarter, plus that? What are we aiming for?
Yeah, it depends on the age, but generally plus a quarter is what I would target for an active duty. A 28-year-old, -250, target plus a quarter.
Now
that would be a 21-year-old plus a half, maybe.
Sure. Well, so much accommodation. Now, changing gears though, what about for pseudophakia? You published or presented a study at the ACOS meeting in Aspen, and it surprised me when you're saying that maybe plano to -1/4 is not the right answer for best distance vision for our pseudophakic patients, for our cataract patients.
I would not say plano. I'd say plano should be the target.
Okay.
So if you hit zero sphere, zero cylinder, you're maximizing the patient's uncorrected vision and maximizing their satisfaction.
Okay.
So what that paper showed is one of the outcomes. This is a really important, I think, outcome for the community, and that is, and this is what I did commonly, and that is, IOLs generally come in half diopter steps.
Right.
Generally, they come in half diopter steps, and so you always have a straddling in your biometry and your IOL power calculation around zero. Right. A 20.5 diopter lens will leave the patient -0.32. And if I go to a 20 diopter lens, it leaves them +0.12. Right. So those are my two choices, right? +0.12 or -0.32. And I'm just using that hypothetically.
Sure.
That's always a choice, right? For half diopter IOLs. Sure. And so what I used to do routinely, and this was taught, well, always aim, in that case, always choose the little bit higher power to leave the patient slightly myopic. Even though they want good distant visual acuity, we're ophthalmologists. We know better than them, the patients.
Right.
They'll be happier if they're a little myopic. They'll get, and there's some logic, but they'll have a little bit more near vision. They'll be happier, trust me. And that's what we did. I did that. Commonly done in the community when you have that split. Well, the study we conducted, and again, that was the just being published now, accepted for publication in JCRS, to show, well, that's definitely not the case. That if you leave the patient myopic, even a quarter diopter of myopia, when the patient wants distant vision, let's say it's the dominant eye of a monofocal IOL, the patients are much more likely to be happy and have better uncorrected vision if you get 0 or even plus a quarter than if you end up minus a quarter or minus a half. So it kind of goes against the common wisdom. The other thing, so in other words, that split, that IOL split, err on the side of if you can hit 0, right? Like if a 20.0 diopter lens, your best biometry would target 0.0 diopters. That's the one you want. You want to get 0.00 is what you want. But in that half diopter split, err on the side of hyperopia. Again, you're much more likely to have patients that are unhappy if you hit a little bit of myopia. And if in a multifocal lens or an EDOF lens, you gain almost nothing in near vision by having a minus quarter diopter.
Right.
You gain hardly anything, right? It's not worth the trade-off.
Right.
They gain one letter in a near chart, but you're giving up maybe one line of distant vision.
Yes.
And you're having a patient that's not quite as happy. Another interesting finding too is, we do, and I know you do a lot of these too, and essentially refractive lens exchange.
Okay.
Refractive lens, patients come in, they're presbyopic. They want a refractive solution for distance. They want a refractive solution for distance and near, whatever. Or even if it's a cataract that meets the indications for cataract removal, but the patients still want, and the demand is quite high, as you know, especially increasing. They want distance, they want near vision. We put in a multifocal lens, or we put in an EDOF, or extended depth of focus IOL. And what we find for like refractive error, that the results haven't generally been quite as good, like refractive error, as they are for LASIK or SMILE, right? In other words, our LASIK patients, minus 250, a younger patient, we typically, well over 90% of those are going to end up 20/20.
Right.
Well over, a 30-year-old minus 3, the chance of them hitting 20/20 uncorrected is very high, greater than 90%. And yet a 60-year-old, 65-year-old who has a normal ocular health, right? Normal ocular health, no other issues other than they've got a cataract and they have been historically minus 250, right? And maybe they're a little bit more now with the cataract, but we put in a lens in them, and maybe we get 80%. Yeah, maybe we get 80% 20/20. And so it's like, but minus 250, they're both the same minus 250, and the macula is just as healthy. Well, as it turns out, if you hit 0/0 on that 65-year-old, 94% or something like that would be 20/20 uncorrected. A very small, in other words, the tolerance for small amounts of refractive error is very, very tight in a pseudophakic. It's very, very tight. So if we could, the more we can nail 0/0 in our pseudophakics, we can approach the results that we get with LASIK. We'll essentially get the results we have with LASIK, but it's got to be 0/0.
So how do we achieve that with IOL calculations?
Well, what that means to me is that we collectively, and I'm talking about industry, I'm talking about the community, I'm talking about our clinic staff, everybody, we as a big group need to step up the game, right? We need to have accurate biometry to predict IOL power. We need accurate biometry. We need to have very precise, excellent nomograms, the power calculator nomograms, essentially. We need to have better ways to align toric IOLs. We need to have better, we need to up our game collectively. Industry needs to play a part in that.
Should we do then? Because one of the things you mentioned, I want to repeat, which I thought was very bright, which is that, yeah, a young person who's phakic and has some accommodation, the landing strip, if you will, is pretty wide. Because if they end up dead on 000 plano, or plus a quarter, or even plus a half, they're still going to have great distance uncorrected vision because they've got that buffer of the accommodation. Whereas if I get a monofocal patient, a monofocal pseudophakic now, there's no accommodation left. And the landing strip now is relatively narrow. And so when you have that bell curve spread, those patients may end up, like you said, a little on the minus side, and therefore not have that great acuity. So should we now be putting in more, let's say, EDOF lenses? Because that has potentially a wider landing strip. I could put an EDOF lens aimed everyone for plus a quarter and probably get more patients to uncorrected Snellen acuity of 20/20 than if I did a monofocal.
Yeah, and what's it? I agree that having a wider landing strip, the landing strip argument, I think, is very real and very apparent. If you can nail 0, you're going to have the satisfaction levels and the uncorrected visual acuity levels that we expect from average moderate myope who's younger and you're doing LASIK on. Right. So that landing strip is narrow. How can we widen the landing strip? EDOF lenses or extended depth of focus lenses of enhanced monofocal lenses might be one way to do it. And again, the idea would be if you target a little bit of hyperopia there, you might have that's the landing strip. Because any amount of myopia, right? Like if you're any amount of myopia, you can't, the EDOF doesn't work the other direction, right? So right. Have to really target either 0 or a slight amount of hyperopia to have that wider landing strip. But if you're, but it's a bell-shaped curve. So if you're targeting minus a quarter, right, you're going to have significantly more unhappy patients than if you were to target either 0 or maybe even, again, on that half diopter interval, a little bit of hyperopia. So you can have that wider landing strip.
Now, what role does the patient's pre-op refractive error have in this, in your planning? And the reason I ask is, after tens of thousands of cataract surgeries, I'm pretty convinced that someone who starts off, their whole life had been a little hyperopic. And so they had no glasses at all when they were younger. Somewhere around the 40s, they start wearing, 45, they start wearing some readers. By the time they're 55, they're wearing +1 for distance. And then on top of that, another 2 for reading. Those patients, I think, will be thrilled at plus a quarter, even plus a half.
Yes. Yeah.
What about a guy like we talked about, or like, here you go, like me, -2 sphere? I'm presbyopic. I got a -2 sphere. I don't like to even wear my full RX. I wear -175.
Yeah. Well,
I think what I have like myopia on the brain. So if I was choosing an IOL for me, I'd rather be plus a quarter, minus a quarter instead of plus a quarter.
That's a good. That is what we assumed also. Interesting in our study, and remember, this is the dominant eye of patients that want distant vision in that dominant eye. So that's a really important caveat, right? This is a dominant eye analysis and those patients that want distant vision. And a myope who is wearing spectacle correction for distant vision has excellent distant vision. If that eye ends up myopic, you're more likely to be unhappy with that eye.
Interesting.
Because it's just as if, it's as if you walked around now for all your distant vision with residual myopia.
Right.
Residual myopia in your dominant eye, that is statistically, if you do 100 patients, whatever, you'll have a higher rate of dissatisfaction in those patients that are -0.5 than if they were plano, even though they were -2 and they love myopia to take off their glasses. So
interesting.
That's what the study showed, that you have to be very careful, even in low myopes, dominant eye, patients want good distant visual acuity, and certainly there's no question about it. And we're talking about monofocal IOL, right?
Right.
A multifocal IOL, a trifocal for instance, you definitely do not want to target any amount of myopia. You want to avoid myopia in those. Nothing in essentially a trifocal lens. Patient ends up minus a half. They don't gain anything in near vision at common distances. What do they gain? Nothing. At 25 centimeters, 40 centimeters, they gain nothing in near vision, and they lose some distant vision. That's like a lose-lose for a multifocal lens, and the study showed that very clearly. You end up minus a quarter in a multifocal IOL. You're twice as likely to have a dissatisfied patient, 2 times more likely. Like,
Yes.
I want to minimize that. So that's a multifocal lens. It's not quite that level for a monofocal IOL, but it's still even a monofocal IOL hit 0, right? 0 is you maximize satisfaction and uncorrected distant visual acuity. And we talk about uncorrected distant visual acuity, right, as a metric, but it's really I use that as a metric for really the ultimate outcome, and that's a happy patient. Right?
For sure. For sure.
You know that probably better than everybody else, right? A happy patient is what you want.
No, for sure. And then to that regard, I've had a patient where a trifocal lens ended up minus a half. And yes, I went back and did LASIK and made sure they ended up plus a quarter in both eyes. Then they were thrilled.
Yeah, that's
you're
right.
Absolutely right. And then also, if you're talking about monofocal lenses, I should preface this by saying, if we're talking about monovision with monofocal lenses, then for sure, even if you start off minus 2OU and you want to have monovision, for sure your dominant eye, your distance eye, your best nail planar to plus a quarter, whereas your reading eye, you got more flexibility, whether it's 1 1/4, minus 1 1/2, whatever it is, you're fine.
Totally agree. Yes, it is monofocal IOLs. Now, it brings up another kind of interesting question, is in a patient that you're going to do a monofocal IOL on, and the patient wants a presbyopic solution, you're going to monovision, right? That is the presbyopic solution in a patient that you're going to put in a monofocal IOL. And patient has never tried a monovision before. What should be the target for that near eye? That's another very interesting. Yeah, that's another very interesting question. We're actually in the process of evaluating that with some large data sets. We did that in pseudophakic monofocal IOLs. We did something similar with LASIK. In presbyopic patients that undergo LASIK, a lot of 55-year-olds LASIK, and so we looked at that in a large data set in patients again that had not tried monovision. And you can give them obviously you give them a trial of monovision to make sure they'll accommodate for it. But nonetheless, what should you target? And we actually found in that LASIK study that in that circumstance where the patient has not been wearing monovision, contact lenses or whatever. If they do, well, that's your target.
That's easy.
Right? That's easy. But if they haven't, and they undergo this is going to be a short monovision trial. You're not going to give them a monovision trial for 6 months or a year or whatever. It's a relatively short monovision trial. That if they end up with about a 150 to 175 add, meaning residual myopia, that maximizes their satisfaction. Any more than that, the anisometropia really starts kicking in, anisoconia. Any less than that, they really don't have, adequate near vision. So somewhere in that range is a good target. Now, whether that applies for presbyopic patients or not, that's what we're currently evaluating.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. Just anecdotally, if someone hasn't really done the monovision contacts before, if you do give them, the plano in one eye, minus 150 in the other, they're pretty darn happy. And then what I do, I make it easy for them. I tell them, because post-op day 1, they may not be so satisfied. They're like, it feels a little weird, a little off. I just tell them, live with it for 3 months. If you hate it after 3 months, come back. I'll do LASIK for the minus 150 and make it plano, and you'll be thrilled.
Yeah.
Then when they come back, I say, well, okay, you want LASIK now, because most don't come back. Most say, okay, they get used to it, they love it, it's the best thing ever. But the rare ones who come back, I say, okay, in my clinic, let me put in a minus 175 contact in that eye, and that'll make that near eye now plus a quarter. And then I say, okay, look out the window. They say, oh my God, I love this, feels so much more balanced. And I say, okay, but look at your phone. And then they say, oh my goodness, I can't see a dang thing. I can't even see my watch.
Yeah. I can't tell you, the patients you reverse monovision on, and then they come back saying, I wanted to watch. That happens too. And that, which brings up another good point too. And that we're talking about uh, a satisfied patient satisfaction, as what I consider the most important outcome, barring safety issues. It's the most important outcome. I think we're aligned on that. But the problem is that patient satisfaction is a funny thing. It's a human nature type of thing. It has so many other factors wrapped up in it, that it's hard to get a complete handle around why somebody is happy and why somebody may not be happy in any given patient. So what that means to me is that from a study standpoint, it takes large studies to weed out the patient that's just simply not going to be happy because they had to wait a long time to park. They couldn't find a parking spot, or waiting room, whatever. The music wasn't good, and they won't tell you that. But that's an element subconsciously of their I'm not happy, right? I'm not happy with this or whatever. Could be partly due to the refractive outcome, could be due to many different things, but there's elements of unknown that requires large sample sizes to make up for that human variability that naturally occurs with these type of things. And large studies that's why large studies, the sample size needs to be very large in order to tease out what is real, what are real drivers of satisfaction, and what aren't. And there's no question that uncorrected visual acuity, we find that to be the strongest predictor of satisfaction, regardless of whether it's a pseudophakic patient with any kind of IOL. And again, dominant eye, patients want good distant vision, or LASIK or any other kind of procedure. It's the uncorrected vision. That's why, right? We've been talking about this for so long. That's why that's because that is a driver that we can control. That's an element of things we can control. There's other aspects of it too. Satisfaction. I think dry eyes clearly a factor in patient satisfaction. I think visual disturbances, especially from presbyopia correcting IOLs, can be a factor in patient satisfaction. And that, though, that to me is IOL design, of course, but patient expectations. That's something we can do something about. Right. Something about, and that goes down to patient expectation. I like your approach. In the discussions you've had previously, I like your approach with that patient expectation thing, because setting the right patient expectation, we know that's going to be a driver of how happy the patient is. For sure. Ever with whatever they get. And so we talk about uncorrected visual acuity, obviously dry eyes, a big factor, visual disturbances, setting the right patient expectations. All of those are things we can do something about and control. We can't control things that are outside of our control, the personality of your patient, other than patient selection, right? These things we can't control, things we can control. So we're talking about things that we can directly control.
Yeah, the patient expectation thing is so critical. I mean, a good example is I went to dinner recently in one of my favorite restaurants, and at the front check-in, they said, I'm sorry, it's going to be about a 30-minute wait. And I said, okay. And I just hung out. And then 15 minutes later, they said, hey, we got your table for you. And I was thrilled. And the food tasted better. But if the opposite happened, if they said, it'll be 15 minutes, and then they finally see me after 20 to 30 minutes, I'd be disappointed. So it's kind of the expectations they set. So they're smarter than I am.
That's a great example. And here's another good one, too. And I learned this from Kobe Kraft. And that is setting the expectations on a presbyopia correcting IOL, multifocal IOL.
Okay.
And that is, listen, one day post-op, immediately after surgery, you're going to notice glare, halos around lights, especially at night. You're going to notice that. It's really important. It's a sign the lens is working properly.
That's true.
We want that, right? We want that. So you're going to notice it. It's a sign the lens is working properly. And with that sign, you'll notice you have good distant vision, and you'll have these halos, whatever, got it, streaking lights, and you'll have good near vision. We want that. So that sets the expectation. And patients come in and they go, well, gosh, doc, I see distance and I see near. it's great, but I'm not getting that glare and halo stuff that you said. Should I be concerned? I'm really happy with my vision, but should I be concerned? I'm not having that. You know, the lens is still working good for you. Okay, so I shouldn't be worried about it. No, you should not be worried. I think you got a good result. That's what you want, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Or the patient comes in saying, yes, I have those glare and halos around lights at night, and I do see good distance and good near. Excellent. Good. That's great. Yeah. That's exactly what we expected. Remember, we talked about that. So again, that's like your example of setting the expectations are really a very, very important part. And that has to do with the relationship with the patient, right? Understanding the relationship with the patient for both the ophthalmic surgeon and really all staff. Everybody that contacts the patient.
For sure. I think what I'm looking forward to, hopefully when in time for me to become pseudophakic in the future, is a truly accommodating IOL. And there are many in development, hopefully in the US, multiple make it to the market. And then you've now expanded your landing strip. Now I can aim all my pseudophakic patients who are getting an accommodating lens, aim them all plus a half. If the lens is giving me 3-4 diopters of accommodation, they're all going to be thrilled.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think that's, listen, for the last 30 years or 20 years, whatever, since, maybe not 20 years, but since accommodating IOLs have first come in, well, that has been the holy grail, to get an accommodating IOL where you can will the accommodation of the IOL, right? With your ciliary body, right? Where you can will that accommodation, and it would have a wide range, you know, a large accommodative range. It's great, and I think that speaks of innovation, kind of the need for innovation that's going on right now, and the need for future innovation.
Yeah, for sure.
Critically important aspect of it, and that brings up too what I think is really important, and I think we understand. I know you understand this. The relationship between providers, you know, the ophthalmologist, and industry is a really important link in that getting innovation going, getting innovation out, right? Studying innovation, those type of things, getting things that work in the community that can help us. And ophthalmology is really blessed because, you know, we have that cycle. We have robust, healthy innovation going. We had it.
Sure.
We have it now, and in the future we want it. So
the ophthalmology is a really neat little world. And my favorite part of ophthalmology is even all the people on the industry side, they may switch from one company to another, but they're always going to go and stay. They're not going from ophthalmology to cardiology or orthopedics. It is a family.
Definitely, yes, definitely. I think, you know, taking somebody who can't see and giving them sight, rather than, you know, Uday, you have whatever, you know, high blood pressure, diabetes, take this medication. You won't like it. It's going to make you sick, but it may help you in 20 years from now.
Right.
Right. Maybe make it less worse.
Right.
Like, that's good. People need to do that. I don't want to do it. Right. I want to take somebody and give them better vision.
That's
or restore their sight, prevent sight loss.
Since you've done this, have there been other Topgun pilots who are ophthalmologists as well? Or are you the only one?
To my knowledge, I'm the only ophthalmologist who was a Topgun instructor. I think there's only one other doctor. He's a radiologist who was a Topgun instructor.
Wow, that's neat.
So, yeah, it's good. It's a unique perspective. That certainly helped shape the refractive surgery program. Getting back to what we talked about earlier, that really helped to shape the refractive surgery program because I had that element of credibility.
Right.
Called a line. The line is the operational Navy. I had that credibility because I was one of them.
Right.
And by that point, many of the senior leaders in the Navy were wingmen I flew with, those type of things. That I would not underestimate. Even in the ophthalmology world here, I think everything is dependent on two things. One is mutual interests. So from industry doctor side, doctor to doctor, industry to industry, mutual interest. You have a need for a new phaco unit. We sell a phaco unit. There's a mutual interest, right?
Sure.
Or an IOL, whatever it is, right? There's mutual interest. But the more important factor is interpersonal relationships.
Sure.
Right? Interpersonal relationships. Like, I don't want to have to deal with that guy because, he's a DICK.
Right.
I don't want to have to deal with him. Or good guy, solid. He's reliable, dependable. I want to deal with him or her. I want to deal with that's interpersonal relationship type stuff, and just like it is in the Navy, just like it is in life, and ophthalmology, the ophthalmology world that we live in is no different.
Yeah. Who knew when you started that one refractive center, it expanded to 24 of them, and then 1 million patients treated? That's amazing.
Yeah. The program continues too, and so it's to a great benefit of the public, because it helps the people that go into harm's way. And I would say not just in military, but this is expanded out. Back then, I was a consultant for police, firemen, FBI, ATF,
Sure.
all the major and other countries. The benefit is very significant. We lose track of that. We lose sight of that sometimes in ophthalmology. The benefit of what we're providing. LASIK, smiles, one thing. Just doing the cataract procedure, the real benefit, the core benefit to humanity of our modern cataract procedure is just unparalleled.
Yeah, for sure.
And obviously, refractive surgery falls in the same category. We can lose sight of that immense benefit because we do it every day, right? Day in, day out. Sometimes we can lose the benefit of what we're doing, the positive effects. And that's, again, another great reason to be in ophthalmology, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I love doing surgery, but boy, post-op day one, where patients are just so wowed, that's a blessing. It's like we get to experience that, enjoy that every week. And I got to end on just two things. One is I really am going to think a lot about the dogma of everyone should be left minus a quarter, minus half, because I think you're right. That was the dogma. It's how I was taught 30 years ago, 20 years ago when I was a resident. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense when we sit here and think about it and when we talked about it. So I agree with that. And the last thing is, I want to know, when was the last time you actually flew a plane of any kind?
Well, I do fly. I fly on United Airlines row 44G. You know where that, all the way in the back, right by the bathroom. The last time I flew in an aircraft that had more thrust than weight, right? So
that's
thrust and weight, meaning it could just take and accelerate vertically. Was my last flight in Topgun.
Wow.
Otherwise, you have no opportunity, right? We civilians have no opportunity to actually pilot in command an aircraft like that.
Sure, of course.
But they have that in the military.
But do you fly like just personally, like even a small Cessna or something, or do you don't fly at all anymore?
I did in medical school. I rented Cessnas, because when I left the Navy, when I left flying, I had multi-engine instrument rating, those kind of things, and I rented Cessnas, whatever. It's a totally different experience.
For sure.
Even for where I was at, it's a totally different experience. You in the F-14 or the airplanes they flew in Top Gun, there's redundant systems. There's an enormous amount of power. There's an ejection seat if you have a problem, right? There's everything, that full instrumentation, radar, you have everything, right? It's the best of technology, just like we have in ophthalmology, right? We talk about that, the best of technology. When you're flying fighter aircraft, it's the best technology. And then you go into a Cessna, and the throttle on the Cessna is a little thing that sticks out, kind of a little coolie hat, and it kind of sticks when it goes in because, it's relatively inexpensive. And the throttles on the F-14, somebody spent millions of dollars designing the feel of it.
Right.
So it's a totally different experience. And don't get me wrong, I mean, people that do that, I think it's great to be able to leave the Earth, to be able to move in 3 dimensions, right? It's what you're doing when you're flying, right? Move in 3 dimensions, whereas us landlubbers, we can only move 2-dimensionally.
Yeah,
right?
right.
Yes, we can walk upstairs, but but we're really confined to two-dimensional, whereas when you're flying, you're like a bird. You're moving three-dimensionally. And that you get this sense that you can move three-dimensionally when you fly. And so, yes, that's great. But going from aircraft to have more thrust and weight that are extremely maneuverable,
Right.
excellent visibility, all the systems, whatever, to a Cessna was just, and they're expensive too. It's expensive to do that. It was from my perspective, it was a enormous step down. It's like a Formula One race driver, and you say, well, would you like to? Yeah, I know you're no longer racing Formula One cars, but would you like to sit in the back seat of my Volkswagen Pub? Because it's driving school. We can go 50 miles an hour. Okay, so that's cool.
Right.
But
It's hard to compare.
It's not my cup of tea. Yeah, it's expectation management.
Yeah, exactly. Well, when you said, wait, the thrust is more than the weight of the plane. Like, whoa, that's crazy.
Yeah. The thrust is more than the weight. And so again, these are just unbelievable machines. But getting back to ophthalmology, so is the innovation that we're using in ophthalmology. These are really unbelievable. OCT.
Right.
OCTs. Right. They're unbelievable technology. Our biometers, our operating scopes, the technology that goes into the IOLs we use. Right. It's just unparalleled. This is incredible technology. Right. This is billions and billions of dollars of technology that we have at our fingertips, much like a fighter pilot that the Navy flying F-35s has at his or her fingertips. Right, the best technology that has been developed. And again, that's kind of the parallel between kind of my aviation career and the ophthalmology career.
Fantastic. Well, what a pleasure talking to you. I'm so glad we could catch up like this. Really some great insight. I'm going to start looking at lens calculations in a lot more detail. I'm going to avoid that dogma we talked about.
Yeah.
And you kind of give me a lot more passion here for this. This is amazing. Well, thank you, Steve. I appreciate it.
All right, Uday, you bet. Great chat. You take care. Keep up the good work, by the way.
Thank you. I want to remind the viewers and listeners, remember, we've got a new podcast every single week, already the top podcast in ophthalmology. And like today's podcast, every week you're going to learn so much. I'll see you guys next time. And remember, no more minus a half when you want distance vision. See you next week.